Value-based pricing is basically your product or service creates value for the other business. What does that mean? What does creating value mean? Let's just say this is the value container, and I've got a bunch of dollars, and let's create value. All right, so today I would love to talk about monetization. Very, very important. How do you get the most money out of your product or service? Today I'm at the Chinese Garden of Friendship right here in Sydney in the city center in Chinatown. Behind me is the ICC, South by Southwest, just finished yesterday, and there seems to be a massive concert going on, so I hope the acoustics are okay. Otherwise we have to apply massive filters. I'm rambling. So today I would love to talk about monetization. Monetization seems to be something that so many startup founders struggle with, so many businesses struggle with. Monetization is basically how do I arrive at a really good pricing so I attract enough customers but also don't leave money on the table. And a lot of startup founders think that the lowest price is what people are looking for, and that is actually not necessarily true. A lot of businesses look for a number of other things before they look at the lowest price. So today I would love to talk especially about startup founders who have product market fit. They're just raised around A, something like that. They have $1 million or $2 or $3 million in the bank, and now they have to switch from being a scrappy startup where everybody wears multiple hats and they had a bunch of pilot customers and the pricing is sort of, they arrived there by accident, and now they want to scale, and pricing seems to be something that doesn't come easy to people. For some reason we're always shy charging for our stuff. Now when you switch from pre-product market fit to post-product market fit, when you raise your round A and you're just starting to scale, that's a massive opportunity to switch from pilot pricing to scaling pricing, or to partnership pricing, or to regular pricing, however you want to call it. So let's talk about pricing. A lot of startup founders just go cost plus margin. You know, they fiddle around with their spreadsheet and then they go like, oh yeah, that sounds about right. So here is how I would recommend you look at pricing. I used to price my product and my startup by just looking at the competitors and being a little bit cheaper, which was a massive mistake. And later on I looked at my competitors and I was a little bit more expensive. Still not the right strategy, because I'm anchoring my pricing at somebody else's pricing and assume that they have figured it all out, and usually they don't. So much later in life I heard something about value-based pricing. So your product or service creates value. Creates value for, if you're B2B, it creates value for another business. If you're B2C, it creates value for another person. Let's talk about B2B. Let's assume you are round A founder. You're just switching from scrappy startup to scaling, early stage scaling. It's a beautiful opportunity for you to come up with a new pricing. You know, changing pricing later in life is very difficult, but at that switch, you just raised a few $1 million. You're hiring people, you start scaling, and now you can go, well, until now we had pilot pricing. But going forward we have scaling pricing, regular pricing, partnership pricing, or simply pricing. And you can adjust, you can turn the dial. You know, like early adopter customers, pilot customers, they are much more forgiving, but they expect much lower prices. Scaling early majority customers, they expect a lot better quality, a lot better services, but they're also happy to pay more for that. So how do we arrive at a pricing that gets us enough customers, that is attractive enough, but doesn't leave money on the table? So value-based pricing is basically your product or service creates value for the other business, right? What does that mean? What does creating value mean? I think of it as 4 different categories. And let's just say this is the value container, and I've got a bunch of dollars here, and let's create value. So it's 4 value methods. Method number 1, how much more money can the business make because they use my product? Hard dollars earned, right? So let's just say this much. Well, you have to calculate that, and we'll get to that later. This is just a demonstration. So I'm creating value for the business. This much value, right? Actually, maybe a bit more. Oh, I'm leaving dollars on the floor. So let's just say my customer can create like $1 million more per year, right? Right here, $1 million per year. Now, the second method is how much money does the customer save because of my product or service? Maybe they're faster, maybe they're better, maybe the staff can get more done in less time. Maybe they need less staff. So let's just say this is soft dollar saved. See, the value bucket is growing. Method number 3 is I would call it the insurance fee, or how much does my product or service reduce my customer's risk. Like sometimes my product or service actually helps a customer to stay in business at all. You know, they need to keep up with technology, and my technology enables them to be in business at all. So that's a massive value right there. Or it reduces risk in other areas. Maybe they have less troubles with customers, or it's a risk to be front page news because one of their products failed, and you know, using my product or service reduces that risk. So let's call it an insurance fee. How much is that worth, right? So let's just say I'm prepared to pay this much to have less risk in my business. I've created a lot of value already, but there's one more, method number 4, which is very rarely used, often overlooked, and surprise, surprise, is the most powerful one, and that is emotional value. Yep, a lot of people don't really like talking about emotions, but emotions are a massive factor in buying decisions. Massive. So when people want something, they use their frontal cortex to argue with themselves why they need it. You know, did you ever have that thing where you really want something and you come up with a million reasons why you need it? Same is the other way around. If they don't trust you and your product is the best in the world, they will find ways to argue against it. So the emotion is so important. And my product can generate emotions. When the customer buys your product, maybe they feel really good about themselves. Or if you sell to a large corporation, maybe the decision maker gets promoted, or you know, big shoulder pad. There is something emotional to every purchase, and your product is no exception. So let's just say that my product makes the customer feel really good about themselves, you know, and of course some of that happiness comes from the ability to earn more money, to save money, and to also de-risk their business. You know, that makes you feel good. But maybe there's a bit of a, you know, I have the latest iPhone sort of feeling for people as well. Or why do people buy a Porsche Cayenne and drive through the inner city with it if a Toyota Camry would do the job just fine? It's because they feel different when they drive a Porsche Cayenne. Like why luxury items, massive example for emotions. Chanel handbag costs what, like $38 in production, and they sell it for $4,000, and they happily pay for it because it makes them feel amazing walking out the shop with a $4,000 handbag and coming home and having the first cup of coffee with their friends, and everybody goes like, is that a real Chanel? That they can charge $4,000 for that feeling. The handbag is not better than a $40 handbag. Okay, maybe a $100 handbag, but it's the feeling they're charging for. So luxury brands have perfected the emotional value creation. But even if you're not a luxury brand, maybe you have a very boring B2B product, there's still an emotional factor in that, and that is worth a lot. So how do you make your customer feel? Now, if you are the salesperson, you as a human being, the connection you have with them during the sales process is actually part of that. So let's just say I make them feel really good. You know, like my product, the sales process, everything is just like, yeah, I feel I'm doing the right thing. I'm not anxious about it. I feel confident. This is the right product. So now I created this much value, right, for the customer. Now, I would love to get some value back. I would like them to pay for my product. So how much do I charge? Depends on your product and your industry, but between 5 and 20% of the value you create, you can keep. So you go to the customer, say, I create all this for you. Is it okay if I keep this? And they go, sure, that sounds awesome. Sounds like a great deal. No customer ever has a problem with you keeping a little bit of the value that you create. The art is in communicating how much value you have created. So this is my pricing. So if this was $2.3 million value per year through the 4 different methods, then I can keep $230,000. Divided by 12, and I have an MRR, and Robert is your father's brother. So thanks very much. I will later explain how to calculate that in dollars, and I will use an example. So that's value-based pricing, basically, where we explain to our customers the return on investment, ROI, and we are explaining that through hard dollars earned, soft dollars saved, insurance fee, and hey, doesn't this feel great? And those 4 methods, well explained, and you keep 5 to 20% of the value you create, no customer has a problem with that. It's regardless of what your competitors charge. If you end up have a higher pricing than your competitors, there's actually a perception of greater value on top of it. I hope this helped. See you next time.